April 1945. The Soviet Red Army has Berlin surrounded. The sky burned. The streets ran with chaos, and deep beneath the Reich Chancellery, in a concrete bunker 50 feet underground, the man responsible for the deaths of tens of millions sat waiting for the end. For decades, conspiracy theories have persisted that Adolf Hitler escaped, that he fled to Argentina, that the most wanted man in history somehow slipped through the fingers of an entire army and vanished. But the evidence tells a very different story. Today, we're breaking down the reasons why Hitler almost certainly never left Berlin alive. This is not just speculation, this is history. By late April 1945, escaping Berlin by air was nearly impossible. Every major airfield surrounding the capital had either been reduced to rubble or had already fallen into Soviet hands. The options were gone, except for one. A makeshift runway had been carved out of the east-west axis road, the Grand Boulevard that cut through the heart of Berlin. The aircraft available were limited to a handful of transport planes and the light, nimble Fiesler Stork, a remarkable reconnaissance aircraft which was renowned for its low takeoff weight. It was one of these very Stork aircraft that Hannah Reich, one of the most celebrated pilots in the world, made her legendary flight into the dying city of Berlin. She landed under fire, navigated bombed-out streets, and descended into the Führer bunker with one mission, that being to convince Hitler to leave. Once he had heard Reich out, he was adamant that he was waiting for final victory or that he was going to meet his fate and die in Berlin. Before Reich departed the bunker, Hitler authorized what would become known as Operation Seraglio, a quiet withdrawal of certain senior government officials and documents considered too valuable to destroy. 3 aircraft were cleared to fly south towards Bavaria and the Obersalzberg. Hitler could have been on any one of them. He chose not to be. We know this because Hannah Reich herself took off successfully and became one of the last people to fly out of Berlin. The runway was still just about barely usable. The opportunity for escape existed. Hitler looked at that window of opportunity and closed it himself. Even if the aircraft had been available, even if the runway had been clear, there is a serious question about whether Adolf Hitler was physically capable of the kind of escape that some theorists imagine. The man who descended into the Führer bunker in early 1945 was not that of the electrifying, fist-pounding orator who had seduced a nation in the 1930s. He was something entirely different. His personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, had been at Hitler's side since 1936, nearly 9 years. Over that time, he had prescribed Hitler a staggering amount of drugs, a cocktail of medications, vitamins, stimulants and opiates, hormones and all kinds of substances, which had long-term effects that were deeply damaging. Hitler had grown dependent on them, and in the final days, when Morell arrived to administer yet another injection, Hitler reportedly shouted at him that he had been giving him opiates the entire time, and dismissed him on April 21st, just 9 days before his death. And the physical evidence was plain for all to see. In archived footage from the final months of the war, it shows clearly that there is an uncontrollable tremor in Hitler's left hand and arm, a hunched posture and a shuffling gait. Historians and medical experts widely attributed these symptoms to the early onset of Parkinson's disease. A man in that condition could not navigate the chaos of a collapsing city on foot. And that matters, because some of those who remained in the bunker until the very last days did escape, not by air, but by foot, using the cover of darkness and the city's U-Bahn tunnel network to navigate their way west towards salvation. Hitler could not have done this. He lacked both the physical capacity and, by every account, the will. He had decided that Berlin was where he would meet his fate, and his body had merely just caught up with that decision. This is where the speculation collapses almost completely, because there were people that were there, and they saw what happened. Multiple first-hand accounts from the individuals present in the Führer bunker on the afternoon of April 30th, 1945, describe the same scene. The door to Hitler's private study was opened. On the small sofa inside were 2 bodies. Hitler, slumped with a gunshot wound to the right temple. Eva Braun, dead beside him, the unmistakable smell of burnt almonds confirming that she had bitten down on a cyanide capsule. Hitler's valet, Heinz Linger, accompanied by SS Adjutant Otto Günscher, were among the first through that door. They confirmed what everybody in the bunker already knew. The bodies were carried up to the Reich Chancellery garden, fuel was poured, and they were set alight. Now, consider what followed in the hours after. because it adds a layer of testimony that is almost impossible to argue against. Magda Goebbels, whom many historians regard as the unofficial First Lady of the Third Reich, had, by this point, made a decision of unthinkable horror. The following day, on May 1st, she arranged for her 6 children to be sedated with morphine injections, administered by SS dentist Helmut Kunz. Once they were unconscious, Dr. Ludwig Stumpfeger helped administer cyanide to each child. 6 children, aged between 4 and 12, murdered in their sleep. After the children were gone, Magda and Joseph walked up to the Chancellery Garden. Both took cyanide. Joseph was also shot to ensure that there was no chance of survival. Their bodies were doused in petrol and partially burned, though the burning was incomplete. When the Soviet forces arrived and found the bodies of Joseph and Magda, identification was straightforward. Joseph Goebbels had been born with a club foot, and his metal caliper brace was still attached to his leg. Now ask yourself this: if Hitler had a route out, why would the Goebbels family not have been a part of this? Joseph Goebbels was perhaps Hitler's most devoted disciple in the entire Reich. He had a wife and 6 young children. The idea that a family could calmly arrange the deaths of those children and then end their own lives without the absolute certainty that Hitler himself was already dead is simply not credible. Their deaths are a testimony written in the most devastating terms imaginable. Let's now talk about something that escape theorists rarely address seriously enough. By 1945, Hitler was arguably the most recognisable human being on the planet. Not just the moustache, the bone structure, the dark, deep-set eyes, his hair, the expression. This was a face that had been plastered across every newspaper, every propaganda poster, and every cinema newsreel across the entire world for over a decade. Now look at the photographs that conspiracy theorists have circulated online for years. Grainy images of elderly men in South America supposedly being Hitler living out his final years in hiding. Here's the problem, however. Hitler died at the age of 56. He already looked like a man in his 70s. The suspected Parkinson's had ravaged his body. The drug dependency and the psychological weight of a collapsing empire had also aged him catastrophically. So, if he had survived, and these photographs were taken during the 1970s as some claim, we would be looking at a man approaching or exceeding 80 years old, ravaged by a serious neurological disease in an era before modern treatments existed. The men in those photographs don't look like that. They look like ordinary elderly men, because that is precisely what they are. And beyond the photographs, think about the reality of daily life in hiding. Argentina in the 1950s and 60s was not an empty wilderness. There has never been a single credible sighting. Not one photograph has withstood scrutiny. Not one testimony from a credible witness. You cannot hide a face the entire world knows, when that face belongs to the most hunted man in history. Both the CIA and Soviet intelligence services launched serious investigations into whether Hitler had survived and escaped. And here is something the conspiracy theorists actually get half right. The CIA did investigate. Declassified documents confirmed that American operatives were still gathering intelligence on Hitler sightings as late as 1955, a full decade after the war had ended. There were leads. There was even a photograph, a grainy image of an unidentified man in Colombia. They found no verified evidence. The investigation quietly faded out. Now compare that to the Nazis who did escape. Adolf Eichmann, one of the key architects of the Holocaust. He fled to Argentina and lived there under a false name for years before Israeli Mossad agents tracked him down and snatched him off a Buenos Aires street in 1960. Josef Mengele also reached Argentina, then moved on to Brazil, where he died in 1979, having evaded justice his entire life. These men escaped using so-called rat lines, networks that were funneling wanted criminals through sympathetic contacts, such as the clerical Catholics as well as the Vatican. Forged paperwork was created, and eventually they were able to leave the port of Genoa in Italy, destined for South America. But here is the detail that dismantles the Hitler escape theory entirely. Those rat lines were not operational in May 1945. They were built up over subsequent years. Mengele reaching South America in 1949, and Adolf Eichmann reaching Argentina in 1950. Hitler would have needed to escape Berlin in the final days of April 1945 on foot, through a city being torn apart street by Soviet forces, reaching a U-boat port hundreds of miles away. Yes, a small number of U-boats did surrender in Argentina in the weeks after the German capitulation. This single fact has fueled enormous speculation, but a U-boat is a cramped, dangerous warship crewed and trained by submariners, not a private escape vessel. And even if he did reach one, Hitler was a 56-year-old man with a drug dependency and a body that was failing him. He had a face that the whole world knew, and he was expected to cross a war zone completely undetected. All of the intelligence agencies of the most powerful countries in the world searched for Hitler and found nothing. He died on April 30th, 1945, and the evidence has always pointed to this. I could go on, as there are many other facts that support this. The real question I want to ask is when the Soviets arrived at the Reich Chancellery Gardens and found what they believed was Ava and Hitler, were they actually the bodies of the Führer and his wife? The investigation into this matter will leave you shocked, as this will be the topic of my next video. Leave a like and subscribe if you found my video compelling, or leave your theories in the comments. I'll be happy to hear them out. Until next time, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.